Welcome back to another Onigatana Devlog. Today, we've got some cool things to show you. Firstly, we've got grapple changes to look at. Secondly, we're looking at how we made flying enemies work in our game. And thirdly, we want to show you some of the visual updates to some of our stances. They're pretty cool. Let's jump into it. So firstly, let's have a look at what the changes have resulted in. We could pick any spot on these grappleable surfaces, and off you go. You start flying towards it. We don't get stuck on things. The grapple itself has a nice chain animation. Some good velocity changes as well. The biggest change of which is you can target things that aren't just these grappling orbs. It's going to allow for a lot more freedom with the grappling hook and a lot more creative movement. This was initially where our design was. Our first grappling hook we ever made was you could grapple to anything. It was super fun, super flexible, but it made designing levels a nightmare. And so we decided we were going to stay away from it and do the safe and normal practice, which is to have a particular object in which you can grapple to. However, when we did that, it started to lack its fun factor. It wasn't being used very often, and you couldn't be very creative with it. And so we've decided through several months of having it at fixed points, that we're going to go back and use this grappling hook that targets anything. Decision made by the design team now. They are confident in their skills and abilities to contain and make maps and levels that work with this feature. Oh, and credit. We are using the Obi rope plugin for the rope physics. Very awesome. Kind of just plugged it in. It took us very little time to actually go ahead and set it up and get it working. So thank you, Obi rope. All right, let's have a look at flying enemies. They were quite a challenge to get in and get working. Let's start with the problem. The problem was Unity's inbuilt system, the nav mesh, which is used for navigating your enemy AIs around. They're called agents. I'll just refer to them as agents. They don't really work very well for flying enemies. You can kind of make it work, but the problem that we were encountering was that we couldn't get it to navigate floating objects in the air. So if there was just a floating platform, a nav mesh agent that's flying would simply just move through it. So the solution was we had to create our own pathfinding system. So I ended up purchasing and going through a course about how to navigate 3D spaces. I was on this website here, Holistic 3D. Seem to have a bunch of other stuff, but if you are looking for a way to navigate 3D spaces, their course is excellent. But let's have a look at the implementation and the solution for it. So the solution to 3D pathfinding is called Octrees, where we divide our world up into cubes, place a little node at the center of all the cubes, and we then can run pathfinding algorithms from one cube to the next. As you can see here, we kind of have some cubes that are just floating in space, and where the cubes are located, you can see there's like a blue cube around it. We know that there is a obstacle in this space, but everywhere there isn't highlighted in blue, we know that that's an empty cube. And you can see that the cubes get more and more frequent the closer they get to obstacles. And this just allows a neater way to pathfind around those. The next step was creating these little nodes here. You can see that we've got these like little yellow spaces and these red lines that connect. This was like the first step. They kind of just connect from the parents to the children nodes, but you can see that it's not really very good. You can see that these three nodes here only connect to one another, and they don't connect to anything else, which is not going to work if we want to move from one node to the next through this whole thing. We did it the brute force way, and we connected all the nodes via raycasts, and we get this mess of connections. Obviously, this is a lot and unwieldy. That was the first implementation, and then we moved on to something much nicer. It's still kind of messy here, but you can see that it's much more manageable, and you can see how everything kind of connects. So we have flight. This little goblin creature going around here. He is navigating the Octree quite well here, just going to random points. You can see how he kind of navigates through things. That is because I didn't realize it at the time, but the pathfinding was slightly broken. But finally, after a little bit, we did end up getting it working, and we got our goblin navigating 2 different points in the map around things correctly. The next step was to actually implement it into our project. But we did run into some issues. One of the biggest issues we had with it was there was a sneaky little bug that was occurring. So I implemented it into the game on these chunks that we were going to spawn in for our infinite level. It's all set up, looks great, looks correct. Where it's close to the ground, there's a bunch of different things. The ground itself is considered an obstacle, and we've got some flight paths going on, so that's great. And for this chunk, It has this huge, like, out of bounds area. Like, it's not confined to just the chunk. And it happened to every single chunk that was not the origin. Essentially, the issue was that when we were creating the Octrees, we were always spawning in one node at the origin of the world. So as you got further and further away from the beginning spawning location, the Octrees got larger and larger and larger. Kind of a sneaky bug, but we did end up fixing it. And as you can see here in the video, that when our player moves from one Octree to the next, it switches. The reason that we have it switching is so that when enemies are pathfinding, they only need to know the Octree that they're in and the Octree that the player is in to do pathfinding only in those two Octrees, rather than the whole map, which could take up a lot of performance. Lastly but not leastly, for the Octrees, I know I had done something wrong with the Octrees and pathfinding. Something went wrong, which caused a drastic performance decrease. When we loaded up the game, we were asking it to run 36 million raycasts, which is essentially shooting a laser beam from one point to another, while the game was also running, which was horrendous for our performance. So, easy solution, we set up the Octrees, we save them into a file, we load them in, instead of having to generate all that information when we first load up the game. All right, here's a sneak peek at our first flying enemy, kind of just chasing the player. The player moves, distance away, keeps pulling it. The enemy continues to come, moving from one Octree to the next. So, victory for flying enemies. Forgive the red enemies, but let's have a look at our new fire charge attack. So this is the big one for the fire stance. We're still working through fire stance, but the charge attack now summons fire pillars out of the ground and launches enemies into the sky. Was really fun to make. Mostly our visual upgrades have been for our lightning stance. We throw out our lightning bolt and let's hit something. First of all, the blind bolt way better, boom, and we leave stuff all over the ground. Very cool. Our charge attack, we zap people with lightning. Particle effects probably need a bit of work with the stone, but they're still cooler. And lightning recoil here. When we press it, give it a little clap. Looking much nicer, a bit more responsive. We actually have some animations in, so it's awesome. As you saw in that gameplay, there was a fair few flying enemies. We've come up with a couple more designs. Some just basic enemies to add into the game, a little bit of variety for the infinite wave spawner. We have some concept art for what the models are going to look like. They're getting made right now. Okay, so these are some of the concepts here for our Ubagabi enemy, which is like a flying head witch that's on fire. These four here are a bit too cartoonish, bit Disney. We're going for one of these two designs on the left and right here. A little bit more sinister, a little bit less cartoony. As well as a quick sketch up for a Suzumabachi, which is our other flying enemy. Just basically comes up and starts stinging the shit out of you. Alrighty guys, that's it for the Fortnite. Thank you for viewing. Remember to like, subscribe, comment. We love to hear what you have to say. As always, come join us on Discord. We've got the link in the description. We want to hear your thoughts and feedback. And from the Repair for Interactive team, we'll see you next time. Bye.